I, Dr. Frederick Palance Barrymore, am about to embark upon a most controversial and somewhat dangerous experiment involving an exchange of the condition of our basic natures. Even as a child, I was intrigued and obsessed with the transformation of one state of being into another. After an endless series of trial and error, I finally found the definitive answer to my laborious endeavors, the actual mental and physical metamorphosis of the human being and his soul. Unfortunately, a grand poo-poo happened, and now I cannot transfer myself back to Dr. Barrymore. And I find I am trapped inside this creature-like being known as Igorro. 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 Hi there, it's me, no Baloney Bill, and I am currently under anger management, just so you know. So today I'm going to talk to you about the differences in the Universal Frankenstein pictures and the Hammer film pictures. Let me start off by saying these are my opinions, okay? This is what I think. Don't care what you think. Well, I care a little bit, but not enough. I have to remember my anger management rules. Stop, breathe, think happy thoughts. Okay, I'm back. So let's first talk about the original 1931 Frankenstein. What? I love it. This is the original Frankenstein movie by Universal. I know there have been others. There's the Charles Ogle Edison version in 1910, but who cares? It's like 7 minutes long and doesn't count. No sound. It's, again, you might think differently, but we're talking about the major influences in Frankenstein movies, which are the Universals and the Hammer. I know there have been others, blah, 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 type it in and let me press the I don't care like button, because I don't care. So the nice thing about the original Frankenstein, I think, is that it's Karloff's performance is breathtaking. He's brilliant. He really is. He has the right feel for what we think the monster is. He's terrifying. It's just a really good film. He even removed his denture, so he had the sucked up look. I've even got my own Frankenstein scar. Can you see it? That was not an accident. I had a little bit of a tussle with an old girlfriend, Doris McKeener. Boy, did that girl have a temper. She was a hot toddy, but she was hot-headed. And she was really good with the old, she had a deadly hairbrush. Let's just say that much. Anyway, Frankenstein, yeah, good film. Some people compare it to the second of the Universal series, James Whale's Bride of Frankenstein. Some people say Bride of Frankenstein's superior, right? Other people say Frankenstein's superior. My opinion, this is the one that started it all. This is it. This is where Frankenstein became, in our minds, a particular creature. The thing about Universal is they focused on the creature, the Frankenstein monster, not the doctor. And we'll get back to that later. So, with that whole flathead look, which Jack Pierce decided, hey, Dr. Frankenstein's not a surgeon, he's a scientist. So the quickest way he's going to replace that brain is to just cut it, open it up, put the brain in, kapunko, and oops, made a mistake there. Cut it by accident. That scar's awesome. And then sew it back up, thus giving him that flat head. And that flat head look with that scar and the electrodes, they're not screws, you screwballs. They're electrodes. Get it right. So many people think they're screws. You know what? Your head needs a screw. Because there's some loose in there. These aren't screws, they're electrodes. They're like battery, positive ends of batteries to hook in the electricity. Bring them in, right? But that look, that scar in that specific place, that black hair, that flat head, those electrodes, the whole walk, that all made our image of Frankenstein's monster to this day, 2021, all the way back to 1931. We still, when kids that are like, how old are you?
7.
7. When you think of Frankenstein, does he look like this?
No.
What? I'm going to talk to you later. Does he look like that?
Yes.
Okay. I guess this picture's a little deceiving to her. But yeah, she gets it, right? And who is she? None of your business. Who are you?
Your daughter?
Oh yeah, that's right. She's my daughter. Part of my anger management skill set is based on raising kids. So there were 3 major influences from Universal. There was Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, all played by Boris Karloff, who played the monster. So those are the 3. I personally like, out of the 3, I gotta go Frankenstein, Bride, and then Son. A lot of people go Bride, and then who cares? But Bride's really good too. And so is Son of Frankenstein. But I gotta keep them brief. I can't go on and on and on. Although I could. Another footnote about the 3rd one was not directed by James Whale, who created Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Invisible Man and The Old Dark House. Great director. Roland Lee, I believe, directed Son of Frankenstein, which came out in 1939. Bride came out in 35, Karloff 31, and the original Frankenstein. The other thing, Son of Frankenstein, they were thinking about filming it in color. That's why all of a sudden he had the fuzzy coat. The fuzzy coat was a weird one. They used it a lot in other references to give him, not like the black sports coat look he had, which was understandable, but, a little bit odd. But it worked. But they had a fuzzy brown look because it was going to give more texture, and because it was going to be filmed in color, that was one of the reasons they went with that choice. And then they went, you know what, that's not working, we're going to go back to black and white, but they kept the fuzzy thing. So Karloff had gained a little bit of weight in 1939. He was getting older. Anyway, so he's a little more full as the monster, but still a really good film. And Lugosi, Bela Lugosi played Igor, and that's the first reference to Igor. Before that, it was Fritz in the 31 version. There was no Igor in 31. And then the second film, there was a character named Carl, because Fritz died in the first one. But Dwight Frye came back in Bride of Frankenstein 35, and was Carl. And again, this time he got thrown off the tower. In the first film, he was hung by the neck by the monster who Fritz tormented Boris, the monster, so kind of had it coming. Second time, kind of same thing. Fritz always played a character that just couldn't leave the monster alone. Anyway, so Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, was, in my opinion, one of the best performances Lugosi ever did. It's right up there with his Dracula, really is. 2 most best performances Lugosi did, I think, were Dracula, 1931, and Igor in Frankenstein. Or the other thing that people know or don't know is that they offered the role to Lugosi after the success of Dracula. They made Dracula first. Hammer did the opposite. Hammer did Frankenstein first, then Dracula. But Universal did Dracula first, then Frankenstein. They offered the role of the monster to Lugosi, but he turned it down because he had no speaking role. There was no talking, and that bugged him. Although some of his best moments as Dracula are where there's no dialogue at all. Just him standing there being Dracula and walking around the grave and the ruins of the castle and stuff. Priceless. But anyway, fate had it. Karloff played the monster, and good for him. So after that, in the third feature, he gets pushed into the sulfur pit. Ah! Falls into the sulfur pit. And then who pops out? But Lon Chaney Jr. plays him. Apparently the sulfur burned all the fuzz off his jacket, because now he's just wearing a normal Frankenstein jacket like the old ones, and Frankenstein and Bride. Ghost of Frankenstein, where Lon Chaney played the monster. And at the end of the film, they transplant Igor, Lugosi's brain, into the monster, which, because of the non-matchingness of the brain, it blinds him. At the end, he's like, I can't see, I can't see it, and he goes crazy in the lab and destroys it and burns and dies. But of course, he doesn't die. He comes back. So, Lon Chaney's performance, I think, is fine. And I know people love him, and I do too. He played all the monsters. He played the Frankenstein monster, he played the Mummy, he played Dracula even, in Son of Dracula, and of course, the Wolfman, his best role. I think he's okay as Frankenstein, but again, he's a little too full for me. But first, let's cut to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, the next one, which I believe that one was 43. So Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which was the first Castle film I got from Famous Monsters of Filmland, the old 8mm silent one. I thought, 2 monsters for the price of one, I gotta do that. Plus, as a kid, I couldn't see it like you can now. You can rent them, get them anywhere, but as a kid when I was a little one, there was nothing. Available. Sorry. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So you got Lugosi playing the monster now. Now, originally he was supposed to be blind and he couldn't see, which is how the film is played. He also talked, because again, he had Igor's brain in him, right? Now, how Igor came back, and I don't know what happened there. But anyway, I think that they weren't as worried about the sequential incidents of each film. They didn't pay as much attention. But what they should have done, and they didn't, is they decided to just clip the film in a way where they edited out the fact that he was blind, so he doesn't look blind, even though he does, but they never acknowledge him being blind, and they cut out his dialogue. So you got him walking around doing this, which is when that whole walk started, right? But the truth is, he was walking like that because he could not see, he was blind. You'd walk like that if you were, pulled out of a sulfur pit.
Or if you were a zombie.
Or if you're a zombie, good point. Pulled out of a sulfur pit. All your hair burned off your jacket. Eyes gone. Poor guy. But they don't give him any credit for any of that. So poor Lugosi's wandering around. Who took the role now? Because Universal didn't really treat Bela very fairly. He got gypped. He really did. He got gypped in Dracula. They underpaid him. He was a last resort. The poor man, didn't have a businessman. He had problems with the English language, and he got ripped off. It makes me so mad. Happy thoughts. But anyway, he was kind of a, So that film, some of the actual best-looking monster moments, I think, are Eddie Parker, the stuntman. He looks like a pretty good monster. So anyway, so you got that. And then we move on to the other Frankenstein films. We have The House of Frankenstein and The House of Dracula. Glenn Strange played the monster. So House of Frankenstein, right? Now we have Glenn Strange playing the monster. Boris Karloff is now playing Dr. Niemann in this because he's too old to play the monster. Lugosi's not in this film. He should have been in it. He should have played Dracula. Lon Chaney plays the Wolfman, which is a great choice. A lot of people like John Carradine. Again, press like it. I don't care if you like it. I think Lugosi should have been in all of them. Lugosi only played Dracula twice. right? And John Carradine came in there. John Carradine is a perfectly fine actor. A lot of people like him with a little mustache and all that. But I got problems with him in Dracula, in House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. I just would have rather seen Lugosi. I don't like his little half cape. I hate those little, those aren't, well, actually a cape is different than a cloak. Most people don't know this. A cape is shorter. A cloak is full length. Hammer Films always referred to Dracula's cloak. Even in our American references, we refer to Dracula having a cape. But technically he has a cloak. Cape can be short. It's a little short in House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula. Not a fan of a short cape on Dracula. It looks goofy. Makes him look like Count Chocula or some kind of cartoon vampire. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't look right. Okay, and yes, he wears a top hat once in a while, but not all the time. Right? Anyway, so we have House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. The great thing about House of Frankenstein is Boris Karloff actually trained Glenn Strange how to walk and move as the monster. At this point, the monster had been kind of taken down to just kind of a walking prop. He doesn't do a lot. He's just menacing. But I gotta say, Jack Pierce picked Glenn Strange because he liked his craggy face. He thought his features were perfect for the Frankenstein monster. And I agree! He looks great as the Frankenstein monster. I like him! Some people are like, I don't like him. I don't care! He was a good monster. As a matter of fact, he looked so good. When Karloff died, in the obituary, they had a picture of Glenn Strange as the monster. They didn't put Karloff in there. Now, I'm not saying Karloff didn't look great as the monster too. He did. But I would say this is my order of who had the best look. I would say first in Universal Films. I would say first it was Karloff, then Glenn Strange, and then I would have to go Lon Chaney, and then Lugosi. But Chaney and Lugosi, I don't care what people say, they just shouldn't have been playing the monster. They're just not appropriate. Should have stuck Glenn Strange in there a long time ago, right? As soon as Karloff bowed out, they would have said, let's get Glenn Strange. Right? That's my opinion. If you don't agree, I don't care. I'm not here to kiss your little smoocher. I'm here to tell you my opinion because it's my show. Anger management. I'm working on anger management. Okay. So, that brings us to the finale. Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. Kind of the last of the Frankenstein era in the Universal Pictures. And you know what? It's a darn good movie. Lugosi's back, thank God. At this point, I believe they thought he was dead because they're not good people. I am, again, going to reiterate, Bela Lugosi got the short end of the stick. As a matter of fact, I'm an actor. I'm a member of the union. I'm a SAG-AFTRA actor. I remember when they merged, and it used to be SAG and AFTRA used to be separate. AFTRA stands for American Federation of Television and Radio. So they were TV and SAG was film. But then they merged and when a corporation merged, it's bad news! Anyway, where was I? Oh, my point being that when Karloff did Frankenstein, James Whale was a little abusive. People don't know this. He's a great director, a little abusive. So, when Karloff was playing the creature, he's carrying up Colin Clive on his back. By the way, Colin Clive is actually taller than Boris Karloff. Can you believe that? There's a scene where Karloff, they're looking for the monster, and Karloff comes behind a rock. He stands up, and then Colin Clive's here, and he looks way taller. But with his elevated blacktop shoes, those boots he wore, those are used for pounding down asphalt, apparently. Anyway, he looks taller, but technically Colin Clive was a little bit taller than Boris Karloff. Anyway, my point, Karloff had to carry Colin Clive up this hill to the windmill. It's a quick shot, but you can see him doing it. And he had to do it over and over. And what happened is that Karloff injured his back pretty badly. Permanent damage to his back. So he was so angry. Well, Karloff kind of denies his anger. I don't know why! But he does. Thank you. He covers his anger. But he did do something. Because of that, He founded SAG, Screen Actors Guild, with a few other actors. He was the founding member of SAG. Because of the abuse in Frankenstein, he wanted to protect actors, and that's how their union was formed as far as Karloff's part in it. Because although the monster gave Karloff fame, it also permanently damaged his back. So, good for him. Anyway, I digress. Back to Abbott Costello meets Frankenstein. Again, great film. Lugosi's back. Glenn Strange is the monster. Karloff wouldn't do it. He thought it would be bad for his image, playing the doctor or whatever. Later on, he realized that Abbott Costello meets Frankenstein was actually a really good movie. So he decided to do Jekyll and Hyde and promoted this one, but was not in it. So we've got Lugosi as Dracula. We got Glenn Strange as the monster, who was great. And of course, Lon Chaney, who was great as the Wolfman. Best thing Chaney ever did was the Wolfman. I liked him in The Mummy, or in The Mummy. People have issues about him in The Mummies, but we'll talk about Mummy later. So, this is a good film because the monsters never play it comedically. I mean, there's a couple moments where Glenn Strange is freaked out because Lou scares him. But generally, which is kind of funny, of course, but it's a good film. And John P. Fulton did the effects. And John P. Fulton was the effects maker in all of the Universal films. His best work is probably The Invisible Man. He also did some nice transition from human to bat in House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. He did it all with shadows. You see the bat rolls and it turns into John Carradine, right? Pretty nice. In this film, in Abbott Costello meets Frankenstein, you actually get a full shot of the bat turning into Lugosi's Dracula. And, it looks cartoony, but it's still really cool. And everything was different then. There were no computers, right? The other thing I noticed about that film is it's interesting because when the bat is grabbed by Lon Chaney on the balcony and they fall into the water, they show the dummy with the bat falling into the water. And when it hits the water a little too soon. It's like they should have let it fall further down and had a little smaller splash. But, again, this was 1948. So, again, a pretty cool shot. And a good film. And another weird moment is at the end of the film when the monster's on the dock and he starts throwing barrels. And then the dock catches on fire. And for some reason, they have him raise his hands and walk right into the fire, which is a weird choice because the monster does fear fire. That's something we've always had going on, right? But I'm wondering if, in a weird way, maybe he just said, I'm done with this stuff. I'm just going in the fire. I'm ending it. Maybe that was his way of saying farewell. But anyway, it's an effective movie, and it's really well done. And it pulled Universal out of some debt, and it was one of the most successful films that Bud Abbott and Lou Costello ever made. So check it out. Okay, next up, part 2. We've talked about the Universal films. Now, we'll talk about the Hammer films. These are the ones that Universal, at this point, Universal had kind of given up on doing classic horror with the Frankenstein, Dracula, and Wolfman. They kind of were done. They, at this point in 1958, when Hammer decided to make Frankenstein, they were making Frankenstein's daughter in America. So Universal was at the late 50s. They were more into the sci-fi bug movies and stuff. But Hammer, Curse of Frankenstein. Okay? So there were some blocks, right? They could not use the look of the Frankenstein monster. They had to go by a new version. In other words, they couldn't use Universal's look, or Universal copyrighted the look of the monster. No one else could copy it. No one. But by Hammer Hat, I got another one that's a much better case, but this one was my original one. I can't let it go! It's actually from England. A buddy of mine gave it to me, and I love it. I've got a brand new one that I wear when I go to formal occasions. But for you guys, this is all you get. So, Curse of Frankenstein. So they could, they had to do their own look. They probably would have anyway. I think, Hammer was doing a fresh approach, right? The story is very similar. Victor Frankenstein, not a nice guy. In the Colin Clive Universal Frankenstein doctor, he was a little crazy, but more of a driven guy, but never really truly what I would consider evil. But this Frankenstein, he's a little evil. He's a little evil. He's lecherous. He commits, he has the monster kill his servant who he's having an affair with, because she's going to tell everybody that she's going to have a baby, so he just locks the door where she is and lets the creature kill her, right? Kind of mean. Then he has a little dainty breakfast after he kills her, and it was with his fiancée, Elizabeth. He's like, pass the marmalade, Billy, dear. Peter Cushing, though. That's my point. Peter Cushing is what Frankenstein's about now. It's no longer about the Frankenstein monster in the Hammer series. It's about the Doctor. So after Curse of Frankenstein, which kind of is the equivalent of the original Frankenstein, same idea. Creates a creature, has an assistant with him. Creature breaks out, goes free, and then at the end, he still doesn't want to destroy it, but his Paul, his friend, ends up basically starting it all. And this time he goes to get the villagers, and then Peter Cushing, as the Baron, panics and runs up and ends up throwing a lantern thing, catches on fire, he falls into the acid and dissolves completely. So he can't prove that he created this creature. So, but the focus of the Frankenstein series from Hammer was about the Doctor, Dr. Frankenstein. It wasn't about the creature. So, to get back quickly, Curse of Frankenstein's a good film. I really like it. I think it's my favorite of the Hammer series. There are other ones where other people say, no, I like this one, I like that one. I get it. But without this one, there'd be nothing. So this was the first one. And yeah, that was Hammer's focus. So when the second film came in, which was The Revenge of Frankenstein, the cool thing about this one was, in the ending of the first one, the creature's gone, dissolved in acid. They don't bring him back. It's not like a sulfur pit or like a fire in the windmill in the Universal series where he falls in the water. No, the monster's gone. But the Doctor at the end of this one is supposed to get his head cut off. Well, he doesn't. He has somebody switch and they cut off a priest's head. And then Dr. Frankenstein is still alive. And now he works under a different name. I believe it's Dr. Victor. And he works at as a doctor. He's a practicing doctor.
You were holding it upside down.
Was I? I was holding it upside down.
That's better.
Thank you. That's my DP. She's 7. So this is the second one. Now I gotta be honest. I'm gonna talk about them pretty briefly. Revenge of Frankenstein is a good film. It's not as evil in this one, but I love it when he calls on other doctors for being hypocrites. Because the whole thing is everybody's like, oh, he practices witchcraft and stuff. And he's like, no, I'm doing what doctors do. But he is a little evil. He works at an infirmary where there's a lot of prisoners and kind of low class people that he helps work with. And one guy's a pickpocket. And he says, well, your arm will have to come off. And the guy's like, but he cuts his arm off so he can experiment with it, right? So again, little evil. When Frankenstein is working on these brain transplants and these bodies, the bodies develop cannibalism. He works on this chimp, and the chimp becomes a cannibal. So when this assistant that he's going to put into a new body, who's crippled and stuff, when the brain is transplanted into the body, the brain starts to transform the body back into a crippled creature again. So it's like the brain somehow connects to the body, no matter if the body is new or not, the brain still goes back to the other pattern. So it begins to become crippled, which was the whole point of this guy getting out of that body. And it also develops a taste for human flesh. So that's kind of the scary element in Revenge of Frankenstein. He gets beat up at the end, but again, he has a body built where they transplant his brain into another body and he's alive again. So there's another one that pops in here, which is called Evil of Frankenstein. Here he is. He's right in there. Got a box set of all these Hammer classics, which is great. But the Evil of Frankenstein is different because it kind of jumps out of nowhere. A lot of people don't like it. I happen to like it. It's the first one that Hammer had a distribution deal with Universal Pictures. Universal had a couple of Hammer pictures when they realized, hey, Hammer's pretty good. So they picked up Curse of Frankenstein, and they also picked up The Evil of Frankenstein. This is the first Hammer Frankenstein film I saw at a big screen. I actually think I saw it at a drive-in. And I like the film. I think it does have, the one thing I'll give it, it's not done by Terence Fisher. It's done by the cinematographer that worked with Terence Fisher, who's Freddie Francis. And Freddie Francis worked with Terence Fisher, but he was a DP originally, so he was more of a visual guy. First Hammer films I saw on big screens were Dracula Has Risen from the Grave and Evil of Frankenstein, which was the Frankenstein series from Hammer, and they're both done by him. Freddie Francis made an impression on me because I saw him on the big screen. So, Frankenstein, Evil of Frankenstein, I think the interesting thing about it is that I think it has the best lab scene, even though it's got Universal influence with the lighting and stuff. But even in the Hammer series, definitely the most colorful, intense, and cool lab scene of all the Hammer Frankenstein films. You can argue with me on it if you want, but I don't care. I don't care.
Remember?
The best!
Remember your temper?
Okay. So Hammer, again, I think made the best lab scene is for sure in Evil of Frankenstein, in my opinion. The other thing about the Evil of Frankenstein is this is the film where Peter Cushing really isn't evil. It's called Evil of Frankenstein, but I'm thinking, no, the guy that's evil in this is the hypnotist. He's the evil guy. You know, Baron Frankenstein in this film is actually he's almost superhuman. You know, he walks up this icy storm mountain to find a hideaway where his younger assistant's out of breath and tired. He never seems to be too hungry. He's always seems like genuinely a good man. He just feels like, I wish these people would leave me alone because they totally torment him. The Burgermeister of the little village steals all his stuff in his castle, steals all his clothes, everything. Just a bunch of political hacks. And he's not doing anything wrong. Other than, oh, he's witchcraft, he's evil. No, he isn't. Now, the monster. Another thing in this film, a lot of people say the makeup is horrible. I say, the makeup is pretty creepy. I mean, think about it. If this creature, realistically, is dumped in an ice, if this creature is dumped in ice, right, and has been frozen forever, when he thaws, he's not gonna look too good. Now, granted, he looked like that before. I always thought he looked kind of like a mummy, and I always thought it seemed appropriate. It seemed like, yeah, if he was really a dead guy, maybe the face, they just couldn't get a good face. So I always thought the look was kind of cool. And it's kind of Karloffian, right? He's got the kind of flat head, because now, again, Universal said, hey, you know, we're distributing it. So if you want to make him look more like Karloff, go for it. I kind of wish they would have. I wish they would have made him look a little more like Karloff, a little less craggy in face. And I got to say this, and no offense to Kawhi Kingston, who is a wrestler. Granted, he's a big guy and stuff, but let's get a more articulate actor. You know, let's get more like a Boris Karloff. He could still be a big guy, or made to look big, because you can do that on film. They did it with Karloff. Karloff wasn't a giant, right? Just get a good actor. I mean, I would love to see him say, I don't know, let's get an actor with Christopher Lee's pantomime abilities, right? He was a brilliant mime, right? He really knew how to, you know, create that monster. And just get a better actor and put more of a Karloff look on him. And then I think we could have had a really cool Universal / Hammer combination film. That's just my opinion. I know people are going to say, no, I don't care what you think. I think it could have been really cool. And I don't think Kawhi Kingston is terrible. I just think he is a little too clumsy. And just not articulate enough. Just, you know, he was more like a zombie, right? And maybe that's what they were going for. But I still think it's a cool film. I like the way the hypnotist hypnotizes him. I think the death is cool. The lab scene's, like I said, awesome. I like Peter Cushing in it. I think it's one of Peter Cushing's best performances as Dr. Frankenstein. I know a lot of people will argue, but I'm like, I don't care. I think it's good. Frankenstein Created Woman. Now, Frankenstein Created Woman, again, is a vengeance story. This time he transplants the brain of a woman. And the woman avenges these 3 aristocrats who basically... I'm lost. Frankenstein Created Woman, 1967. Now this film, I just began to realize there are a lot of guillotine events in these films. It starts out with Curse. It's the beginning of Revenge. Again, the guillotine stuff. And then we skip, of course, to... Evil of Frankenstein, which is kind of just a remake of the original Frankenstein story. It's kind of out of context. And then we go back to Frankenstein Created Woman. Again, it starts out with another guillotine. And this one, it's a little complicated, but this particular film is about the soul. Now Dr. Frankenstein is creating a way to capture the soul. So in this film, Hans, this guy that helps him out, his dad was guillotined, so he's got some bitter memories about the old guillotine, right? Well, anyway, what ends up happening is Hans is in love with this girl who's a little crippled and a little burnt. Her face is scarred, looks like a bird, but they never do say. Susan Denberg is the girl. She's a hottie, was a playmate for Playboy, Susan Denberg. Anyway, she has this scarred face on half her face, and she's got a little bit of a cripple walk. Anyway, he loves her. Her father owns an inn. Well, everything is going fine, although the inn owner doesn't really like him. But then these 3 dandies come in, and I always watch the dandies. Oh, the dandies! They make me so... I don't like dandies. These guys are horrible. These 3 pompous aristocrats. They come in completely cruel. Anyway, push comes to shove. They end up at a certain point sneaking into the inn, and the owner comes in, and they kill him. And of course, the constables blame Hans. So what do? They go out and they cut his head off, just like his dad. So she's all distraught, Christina, and she goes and kills herself too. Meantime, Frankenstein's like, oh, I got an idea. So he gets Hans' body after they cut his head off, takes the body back, and captures the soul with these weird kind of lights, right? And then he's got the soul, and then the girl, they bring her back, and he brings her to life and cures her, fixes her leg and her face, and she's all good. And somehow, they never really clarify, but at some point her soul is being confronted and taken over sort of by Hans. And even Dr. Frankenstein says at one point, well, his soul's there sometimes, but not always. It's like, what? So it's kind of vague and weird. But anyway, that's kind of the plot of Frankenstein Created Woman. Eventually what ends up happening is Hans' head is kept by Christina, again, another head. And she plops it up on her bedpost at one point, and he talks to her and convinces her to seduce and kill all three of the dandies, which she does, and they totally got it coming, right? And then at the end of the film, she feels bad about it. The monster, the head is, at one point she's actually holding the head and talking, but it's Hans' voice. Very strange. So at that point, maybe Hans has completely taken her over, but then again, she pops back, kind of like Jekyll and Hyde. She pops back, she feels bad about everything. Then she jumps into the water and drowns again. And he just walks off, and then credits roll. So the one thing about this film, and the next one actually, is they have very abrupt, quick endings. There's no resolution in these Hammer Frankenstein films. It's like, oh, there's a fire, they die, or there's water, they drown, and end of film, right? Most of them end in a blazing fire. A lot of people really like the focus in the Hammer films of Peter Cushing being, the focus, and it's all about the doctor. So I remember Christopher Lee once said that he thought that the Dracula films were more popular because people went to see the films to see Dracula. And he said that when people go to see the Frankenstein films, they want to see the monster. And I think for a lot of us, it's kind of true. I'm an old monster movie fan, so the real monster in these films is usually Peter Cushing as the doctor. So it's kind of a different kind of approach. And I think it did have a different effect. But again, I digress. That's just the way Hammer worked. They were much more intellectual, these films. The next one, which a lot of people say is their favorite Frankenstein film, is Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. This one came out in 1969. Again, this one is not about the soul now. Now it's back to the old brain swap. And again, more heads cutting off. Film starts out. Peter Cushing, his little spats are walking down the street. Takes out this hook thing, hides behind a door. Doctor's walking down the road, and whacka! Blood splats on the doctor's wall in his outside office. And next shot, Peter Cushing has a little, hat holder with the head in it, right? So he's cut off another head. He's into heads. Always needs a new head. Meantime, guy's breaking into his, ends up in his lab, and Dr. Frankenstein knows he's in there because he hears a noise, and he puts on this weird rubber mask. Dr. Frankenstein does, Peter Cushing does, and tries to scare and terrify this guy. In the meantime, the guy runs into a whole body that's frozen in a case. So this guy sees that, falls on him, he freaks out. He tussles more with Dr. Frankenstein, this thief that broke in. And then he ends up falling against the little hat box thing, the container. That falls open, head falls out. He freaks out. He freaks out at that. And then he runs off, and then Frankenstein's leaves. He's gotta leave again. Somebody disturbed his experiments again. So he leaves. He ends up going to Veronica Carlson, Anna in this film, stays there as a tenant because she's renting out rooms. Well, anyway, he ends up finding out that her boyfriend works at the insane asylum. He's stealing cocaine to help her mother, blah, blah, blah. Peter Cushing finds out, blackmails them, ends up kicking all the other people that are in her house out, and then he runs and takes over this place and blackmails them and has them help him so that he can start again. And he ends up again going to the insane asylum, getting the doctor that knows how to transplant brains more successfully than the doctor Frankenstein knew. And he ends up grabbing him, pulling him in, taking out his brain, putting it into another guy's brain or body, and it gets very confusing. But it's a well constructed plot. Again, it's all about the doctor transplanting brains. So in the meantime, there are things that make him truly, if the film was called Evil of Frankenstein, I'd say this is the one where Peter Cushing as the doctor is the most sadistic evil of all the Frankensteins. I think Curse, he's pretty evil. Revenge, not as bad. Evil of Frankenstein, actually good. Frankenstein Created Woman, again, not totally bad, But this one, I think maybe he's had enough. And he's like, enough with these people. He gets really evil. He also does a scene in it with Veronica Carlson, Oh, incidentally, as a footnote, I noticed the soundtrack is very similar to Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, which came out a year earlier before this one, and Veronica Carlson was also in that. So there's, the soundtracks, the music tracks in these films have always been a little different, but there definitely is almost the same track in certain parts of this film. So, where was I? Oh yeah, so there's a scene where Victor Frankenstein actually locks the door, and then he takes advantage of Veronica Carlson. He attacks her physically, and Peter Cushing didn't want to do this scene. He didn't like the idea of Frankenstein, sexually assaulting a woman, but they were like, well, he's not you, so they have him do that, which makes him again pretty evil. So anyway, getting back to the plot. So Dr. Brandt, the guy who goes insane, Frankenstein transplants his brain into the director of the insane asylum, and so now Bryant's brain is in a different body. So he's all wrapped up and stuff because he's been operated on. And then the wife gets wind of all this stuff. She ends up seeing him. Frankenstein, introduces him to him and says, "This is your husband," and he's all bandaged up, so she believes it's him. And then she's all happy, and he says, "Well, come back tomorrow, and everything will be good." And of course, as soon as she leaves, he's like, "We're getting out of here." So he takes that body and brain and takes Anna and Hans, I think his name is again, and they move to a different place. And then the police come back. They find the dead body of her husband, which she thinks, oh well, he's dead now. So the creature eventually, chaos ensues. He comes out of his catatonic state. He rips the bandages off, comes out, scares Veronica Carlson, and she stabs him because she's scared. And then Victor or Frankenstein finds this out. He stabs her, kills her. The character that knows Frankenstein, knows what he wants, goes back to his own house, puts the records out that Frankenstein wants, douses the place with gas, and basically gets him inside and tells him it is where it is. But then he starts burning up the house, and then Frankenstein's trapped. He breaks out. Dr. Frankenstein does. Brad gets out there. They tussle, and then he pulls him back inside, and he's kicking and screaming. Dr. Frankenstein is over his shoulder, and the place burns down, and that's the end of Frankenstein. It was kind of a good finale to the Frankenstein series. There was a total of 7 films made. So we got that, right? And then we go back to another weird area with Hammer's ending Frankensteins. We got the horror of Frankenstein, which Jimmy Sangster directed. He was the writer for Curse of Frankenstein, great writer. He even says, I might have not done that. We were having too much fun on this film. Maybe I should have taken it a little more seriously. Ralph Bates is okay. They were going to make Ralph Bates the new Peter Cushing because Peter was getting a little old, and so they thought, well, maybe Ralph Bates will be our new Dr. Frankenstein. Ralph Bates is a good actor. He's in Taste the Blood of Dracula. He's in Horror of Frankenstein. He's in Dr. Jekyll as Sister Hyde, which I think is the best. Ralph Bates, I think, is the best in that film. But anyway, he's okay. The monster is David Prowse, right? Who's a big guy, played Darth Vader, got a big heart, love the guy, physically great, a bodybuilder. Right? So you got this big bodybuilder guy. But again, just, no articulation. This is not an articulate creature. Not written that way and not played that way. But, I think you go about as brutish as Glenn Strange as a Frankenstein monster, but other than that, otherwise you just, something's missing. It's not my favorite. I don't know, it's a little, he's kind of a lusty guy, and there's lots of boobs in it and stuff, and Hammer's very famous for boobs, but they became more famous for boobs as the films became less and less about the plot. And it's just unfortunate. Veronica Carlson's in it though. She's awesome, I love her. She's such a hottie, and I've met her, she's just she's a doll, and she's a very talented artist, very good illustrator. So since we're focusing on the Frankenstein character of these films, the plot is, basically he again creates a monster, makes the monster bigger, thus David Prowse, so it's easier, but to put him together. But he does this weird thing where he paints like numbers on it, like the arms are 1, the chest is number 2, and he puts together like a puzzle, like we don't know where the arms go. I'm like, really? You gotta number them? You're gonna forget? It's just weird to me. And there's just a lot of that kind of bizarreness to this film, but not a horrible film. It's got a funny ending where the monster's hiding in his acid vat, and a little girl comes in and pulls the string, and the acid pours on him, and he knows right there, oh, that's the end of the monster. Sure enough, he peeks his head over, and then bloop, 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 the boots pop up, and that's the end of him. It's the Hammer film that people complain most about, and it's just not really in the flavor of Hammer. This is 1970. Hammer kind of didn't really know where to go, right? Because their Gothic style was being taken away by, this was not long before, Rosemary's Baby came out in '69, and the supernatural elements were taking over, and so Hammer started resorting to more cleavage and boobs and nudity, and they were trying to find their identity, to reinvent themselves, and the Gothic era was fading away. Which brings us to the final film. I like this film. Got bad press, I think, when it came out. It's a better film, I think, than, certainly better than Horror Frankenstein. It's nice to see Terrence back in the seat. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. This came out in '74. Terrence Fisher was back in charge. Terrence Fisher had a inkling for having a little too much to drink, and would constantly be getting hit by cars. He would always be in car wrecks. I don't know if the guy just got real wasted and like, hey, let's go out and chase cars like dogs. I don't know what he was doing. Apparently he rode a bike a lot. I don't know all the truth to it all. But I have heard that he got in more than one car accident, and he liked his booze, which, okay. So anyway, but he was back, and this is his last directed film, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, and it's not a bad film. I like it. Hammer has a different flavor now, a different taste. The Gothic style is a little more subdued. In all the earlier Hammers, there was really brightly lit, fantastic costuming, and really neat greens and reds, and lots of really cool lighting, especially in all the earlier Hammer endeavors. Brides of Dracula, really beautiful lighting in that. Horror of Dracula, Curse of Frankenstein. Some of the Mummy has really nice. Jack Asher was their lighting guy, and just director of photography also was really good. So anyway, this film is darker than that. It doesn't have all the brightly lit sets. It takes place in an insane asylum, and there's just this weird Neanderthal creature that they end up bringing back to life, and it's again David Prowse. He's in this really weird apish outfit, and the creature ends up, of course, running amok, and eventually what ends up happening in the end of this film is Dr. Frankenstein, now his hands are burnt, so he has Shane Bryant help him assist in all these experiments. Basically, Dr. Frankenstein's running the insane asylum because the insane asylum director is this perverted weird guy who actually molested his own daughter, who becomes mute because it's so traumatic for her, and she's helps the doctor out too. So anyway, they try to do the right thing with bringing this creature back to life, but eventually it runs amok, and the insane asylum people end up actually tearing the creature apart, and all chaos ensues. And then the doctor comes in and says, "There's nothing to see here. Go away." So all the insane asylum people go back because he controls everything. And then the last scene is he's just sweeping up the mess that has happened, and he starts talking about their next experiment. and says, well, this is probably the best thing that could have happened to that creature. It wasn't ideal anyway. And so it has this kind of anticlimactic ending where the doctor doesn't die, he doesn't end up in a fire. But that kind of is the ending of the Hammer Frankenstein films. So I know I didn't get out every detail. I'm sure I forgot to mention a few things, but hey, I'm not perfect. Just trying to compare Hammer with Universal. And again, Universal was all about the Frankenstein monster, and Hammer was all about Dr. Frankenstein. So I think I pretty much summed up the Hammer Frankenstein films. Again, if I've missed something, I apologize. I'll see you next time, maybe, I don't know. I'm still working on my anger management, and I'm still sometimes a little, but I am working on it. So I hope to see you soon. Hello, it's me, No Baloney Bill, and I got some no baloney to talk about. The title of this particular piece is To Remake or Not to Remake, and that means, do you remake a classic film? So, sometimes you do, and bravo, and sometimes, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? Don't do that. Don't remake that movie. Come on! Oh, it makes me so mad when they make bad remakes. It makes me want to... Again, this is all just my opinion. Just no baloney Bill. Just giving you the facts. And you better take heed, because I know what I'm talking about. So, let's talk about the best remakes that I can think of classic monster films. Classic ones. So, good remake is... John Carpenter's The Thing, and then there's John Carpenter's The Thing, and then there's John Carpenter's The Thing. You get my point? In other words, there's not a lot of them that should have been remade. See, the thing about a remake, in my opinion, is it is a perfect storm. There's a perfect time to remake a film. So I'm going to talk about a few that were remade. I'm not going to hit them all. I'm going to jump around. There's no chronological order here. So there you just deal with it. Okay? Relax, relax, Bill, relax. So here we go. I think, again, a good remake is the John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. The original Thing was a great film. And to this day, I love it. They're both good films. When they first made the first 51 version, they did want to do some, transforming, because of course, as most of you know, The Thing was based on a short story called Who Goes There, which is a great title. And it did have The Thing, metamorphosizing into other things. He consumed and changed forms. Well, they tried and thought about doing that with the original 51 Thing, and they just didn't have the technology. So they're like, you know what? Let's just make him kind of like a Frankenstein monster, and he's good to go. And it works. I mean, he doesn't look all that different. They give him some little cucumber claws and a bald head, which apparently a lot of aliens are really into not having hair. But anyway, it works because the focus was more on the relationships of the characters, which there was this great camaraderie. And also that film had a device that wasn't used a lot in film, but was used in that film, which is where people kind of interrupt each other and talk over each other, which is something that happens in real life, but films, they hardly ever do it. So it works as that film. And I think when Carpenter remade it, he said, now we have the technology do those transformations, and I think that's one of the reasons that the remake of the thing works so well. And again, it's practical effects, right? Rob Bottin, and it works, and it's creepy, and it's a remake that was needed. The time was right, the storm was perfect for it, came out in the 80s, and just a good remake of a film. Now, there's a couple of good remakes of films. Most of them are about organisms or creatures, but not necessarily man-made monsters, in my opinion. And I'll tell you what I mean by that later. Another one that was a remake that I thought was pretty good was the remake of The Fly. David Cronenberg's The Fly. It's a good remake. It's a good idea. Instead of just having him transform in the chamber and also fly head and fly hand and fly foot, the molecules kind of mixed together, and he kind of looked normal when he first came out, and then he just started to change. And again, the technology allowed us to see it done in a way that makes more sense as far as science goes. So in 1958, with the original Fly, you're like, well, we'll just give him a fly head. And I guess when Vincent Price and that other guy saw David Hedson as the little fly in the cobwebs at the end, help me, and his little head's on the fly body. When they were looking at the fly, they kept cracking up because they just found it kind of funny because, you know, obviously there's nothing there, and they're supposed to be looking at a little fly head, and they just couldn't stop laughing. So, can't blame them. Anyway, so I do think that remake works. I think it's a good idea. Again, the technology was there, and it was the perfect storm. It was time for that movie to be remade. And so it's, in my opinion, a good remake. Another one that's, again, about weird organisms, and the effects have a lot to do with it, was the remake of The Blob. I like the remake of The Blob. It, again, came out in the 80s. A lot of these films came out in the 80s. They waited, 30 years, 20 years. The appropriate amount of time said, okay, it's time for a remake, and we have better technology now. Now that film, even though I think it's a good film, it wasn't a perfect storm for it. When it came out, it wasn't that respected. Oh, it makes me so mad. But it didn't really do well at the box office, and I think it's a better film than it was ever given credit for. So, why do some horror films work as remakes and some just kind of don't? There's a lot of reasons, and I don't know them all. I think that the one thing that I'll say about our classic monsters, the Mummy, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula, these films, I think, were made in a time when the world was ready to see them. I mean, no one knew when Frankenstein came out in 1931. No one realized what a great film it would be. They're an accident. No one knew. But Frankenstein's a good example of a film that's kind of hard to remake because it isn't based on effects. It's not like the Frankenstein monster changes form, or it's a blob, or it's an alien that, breaks out of its chest, and it doesn't do that, right? So what are we left with? We're left with going back to the novel, the 1818 novel. You know what? If you go by the novel and you base a movie on a book that was written in 1818, it's just not going to work. It might work, but we have already got the Frankenstein monster in our brain. It's iconically been set. So it's like saying, oh, there's that tomato, but I got a new tomato. It's squarish, and you're going to like it. And you're like, yeah, okay, maybe I would, but I still keep seeing the other tomato. You just can't erase something that is that classic and iconic in our mind. So all the remakes to me are, I think Hammer did it best because Hammer had something to bring to the table. Again, a perfect storm. They came out in 58, the Hammer Frankenstein, and they're like, well, now what can we do different? We can bring it in color, and we can bring in some more violence and a little more, a little more sex, and it just, it works, But they're remaking the classics, and they're bringing color and a little more gore, a little more excitement into the genre, so that works. But then, you go 30 more years from 58, you go to 2000 and stuff. What are you going to do then? I'll tell you what you do. You ruin it with CGI. Or you remake Dracula and he looks like my grandmother. I mean, I like Gary Oldman, but come on, Grandma. What's he wearing? And what's going on with his hair? He looks like The Simpsons. It looks like something went wrong with his beehive. It just doesn't work for me. I know people love it. Oh, it's so different. It's like, yeah, it's different. Doesn't mean it's good. Dracula wears a cape. Sorry, but he does. I hate it when they don't give him a cape. Give him a cape. I understand the period and the la-di-da. But you know what, again, Lugosi kind of set an image in our mind of Dracula. And then it was kind of reformed with Christopher Lee's Dracula. Again, they had something new to offer. They had color, they had a little more violence, they had a little more action, right? But then you go into like Van Helsing and the CGI stuff, and what are you doing? You're working way too hard. You're not focusing on story. You're not bringing us back a classic character. You're trying to reinvent him. And we're not gonna buy it. I mean, if you're gonna remake Dracula or Frankenstein or even the Wolfman, which the Wolfman was okay, it was an okay attempt. Thank God for Rick Baker, who fought tooth and nail to get back the original Lon Chaney look. But again, why are you CGIing the werewolf? You know, Wolfmen and Dracula and Frankenstein, these guys are men. The wolf man, he's part wolf and part man. I know sometimes they transform into a complete wolf, and I'm not crazy with it. American Werewolf, okay, I get it. But you know, I saw The Howling first, and I kind of like The Howling better. Sorry, I know it doesn't agree with it, but I don't care. You think I care? Do I look like a man? Who cares what you think? Maybe I do a little bit, but not a lot. I like American Werewolf. I think Rick Baker, again, did a great job, but when they started doing stuff where the computers are taking over the practical effects later on in the 2000s and stuff, you're losing it for me. You don't need it. You're not focusing on what makes them work. You're living in an era where people don't even really want to see the Wolfman. The only people that are going to go watch the Wolfman are people that like monster movies, right? No 11-year-old's going to go watch the Wolfman. He's got Harry Potter. He's got, Star Wars, episode 49. I mean, come on. It's a different era. Things have changed. Maybe it's time to just back away and let those monsters be. I mean, prove me wrong. But so far, that's what I'm thinking with these remakes. Now I hear they're gonna remake The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Why? Why are you wasting your time? I don't get when they make The Creature why they do that weird thing where they make this part of his mouth white. I get it, like that's what a fish looks like and stuff, but I'm like, you're working too hard. Just make him green. He's the creature. You want to make a different movie, call it something else. As a matter of fact, that's a good idea. I had this guy one time, we were talking about The Exorcist, right? And he had just seen it, and we're talking, this was like 5 years ago, so it was like 2015. He goes, I don't get it. I don't think it's very scary. It's kind of slow. Blah, blah, blah. And I just want to take it. Wake up! You didn't see it when it came out in the 70s. It was a different era, right? It had an impression because no one had seen anything like it before. And again, no CGI, all practical. Dick Smith did the work. It was terrifying then. It was the time that it was made. These films were made at a certain time for a certain reason. And remaking them sometimes works, most of the time doesn't. Alright, so my point being this, that, a movie came out at a certain time and, they didn't know what they were making. Like, The Creature from the Black Lagoon is, again, a perfect example. It came out in 1954. Came out for a reason. It was a time for that kind of movie to come out, right? They were kind of gearing away from the Gothics. They were done with the Wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy. And they were getting into the Bug movies, Them and Tarantula. Great movies, right? And The Creature just kind of snuck in there. Because he was another, a science gone wrong kind of thing, but a natural science, not a Frankenstein science, right? So that's why that movie worked in 1954. I don't really think we need to see somebody make it again. Because you know what's going to happen? I'll tell you what'll happen. They'll either do a good job, which is really unlikely, or they'll go nuts with CGI. And then all the fans of the original Creature go, well, this isn't anything. It's like, why bother? Just make a new movie. Make a new movie. There are certain iconic heroes that we can remake. We can remake Superman. He's still around. He's still a comic book. So you want to, take his little red pants off, which kind of bugs me a little bit. I kind of like the little red pants. But okay, I get it. I think physically he looks great, But you can mess with Superman and Batman. They're still around. But Frankenstein and Dracula, they're not around anymore, except for monster lovers. They're relived through the classic versions of them. So that's why I don't think remakes are very often successful. As I said, there have been remakes of Dracula. They remade it, of course, Hammer redid it, which was great. And then they did it again in the late 70s, I think 78, 79. Frank Langella made it. It was okay. Like, I found the effects to be really bad. And in the end, what does he turn into, a kite? He looks like a kite. He looks like a kite. And I was so confused at that ending when he falls off the ship and I'm like, what's going on? Where's the string to the kite? I just didn't get it. And I know it was all suave and smooth, but like when he jumps through the window and all of a sudden he's a wolf, it's like, really? But it was made in England. Maybe they weren't up to their effects as much. And it's minor. But the film's not about the effects really, but it was okay. I don't know if we really needed to see it again. I think we felt like we did. I think every 20 years or so someone says, oh, we gotta remake it. Maybe you don't. Which brings you to the Bram Stoker version of Dracula, according to Francis Ford Coppola. Very lavish production. Still always bugs me how Jonathan Harker is totally clueless to things around him that just don't make sense. I mean, you're in a carriage, you look out the window and you see blue rings of fire and wolves chasing with glowing eyes and you're like, oh, what? Respond, react. I mean, come on. I'll give credit to the new Jonathan Harker in that recent television version, which again, I don't know if we really needed it, but for the first time, I thought Jonathan Harker was reacting to stuff the way Jonathan Harker should. I like Dwight Frye. I thought it was cool in the original Dracula how Dwight Frye kind of became Renfield, and he was kind of freaking out. But the denial that poor Jonathan Harker has to go through when he meets Dracula is mind-boggling to me. Which is why I really love the 58 version, or the 57 version, Horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee, because they don't, you know, when you're doing Dracula and Frankenstein, you can take elements of the novel, but it doesn't have to be exactly like the novel. It's a movie, you know, you've only got an hour and a half. So I love that Jonathan Harker, when Jonathan Harker went to Christopher Lee, he already knew he was a vampire. He went to kill Dracula in disguise of being his solicitor, but he was really there to get him, which I think makes that a really great version. And they also cut out the whole ship where Dracula comes to England because they just didn't have the budget or the time. And you know what? You don't miss it. You don't miss it. Movies are movies and novels are novels. And you take the best parts of the novel and you put them into a movie. That's how you do it. You know, people don't realize that sometimes movies are, you know, their success is accidental. I mean, even Jaws was almost pulled. They asked the editor, they asked her, they said, should we just stop this because it's totally going out of budget? And she's the one that cuts the dailies. And she said, no, actually, let him finish it. It's going to be a good film. So Jaws was, as Steven Spielberg said, his worst nightmare. And a great movie. And again, you know, a lot of people watch now, they go, oh, the shark looks funny and stuff. Believe me, when that movie came out, I, to this day, will not swim in the ocean. It's one of my favorites. It's a grand movie. And again, total accident. You know, just happened to be the perfect storm. And that's the thing about remakes. They're seldom the perfect storm. Frankenstein, I've seen, you know, several versions of it. I remember the 1,000-part series on TV on NBC, I remember, with Michael Saracen, the Frankenstein, the True Story. Oh, I hated it. I hated it. They always say, oh, this is the true story. This is how it really went. No, he wasn't beautiful when he was first made. In the novel even, he's described as having yellowish skin that you can kind of see through. He's got these pearly white teeth and this luxurious black hair, but they say it only makes him look more hideous. I mean, that's not a pretty boy. Somebody just by accident happens to do the brilliant thing, like Jack Pierce just had a brilliant makeup for Carlos Monster, and that was, you know, a zillion years ago, and it's still, when we think of Frankenstein's monster, that's who we see. No matter how many times you remake it, how many millions of times people say, oh, that's a better version, I like that, I like this. You know what? It just didn't stick. Somebody did it first. And that's the thing about a classic movie. Nobody remakes The Wizard of Oz because it was a perfect storm. It was a perfect accident, right? Just make another movie. Star Wars, it's like they just did their own thing. They stole ideas from other things because there are no new ideas. Shakespeare wrote 37 plays. There's only so many stories. So let's not remake movies. Let's just make new movies. Let's make new monsters. Monsters have changed. Let's use a little less CGI. There are some reasons for CGI. Kong vs. Godzilla, okay, I get that. You got giant monsters and stuff. But I gotta be honest, I miss the miniatures. I like the little buildings in Tokyo. I love that stuff. I miss them. It's cool. There's a sense of fun. Practical effects are more fun, and in reality, practical effects have a visceral identification to us. We don't know it, but our mind knows when we're not looking at the real thing. It's kind of like the beginning of a Bond film, especially the 70s with the Roger Moore series. Every time there was a spectacular stunt at the beginning, like a skier goes off a mountain all the way off and falls into the abyss. When you're watching that, you know that's a real guy out there. And sure enough, a parachute comes out and it's okay, But you're watching it knowing that guy is out there, and if that parachute doesn't go off, he's gonna die. You watch a movie now, that never happens anymore. Even the remake of King Kong 2005, Peter Jackson, I thought it was great. It was way too long, but it was a good film. He kept it in the period. He kept it in the 30s. He had a love for the original Kong, so he paid tribute to it. I mean, even the 76 Kong, right? Even that one, the director built a gigantic Kong, but it looked so horrible that they only used it about half a second, maybe 2 seconds. Basically, they just used it to be dead at the end. And even that very quick shot where he drops the cage, you could tell it's a robot. They couldn't even use it. They had to end up using Rick Baker, who did a great job. And just respect our classic films. Respect them. We love Dracula. Here's another weird note about Dracula's costume. Things I don't like about Dracula. I like it when, if they're going to give him the medallion, I like it when the red thing is just like on the universe, like the one Lugosi wore. I like that one. It's short, ends about there, down there. I don't like the dangly one, right? The one that looks like you bought it at the costume shop. The one that has the long ribbons down there. I hate that. It looks so stupid. And I hate it when they give his collar red lining. It's like, that's overkill, right? His collar should be black. Put the red lining in the cape. I like the Lugosi version. He wore two. I like both of them. One with a little medallion, one without. Both great. And I like what Hammer did with Dracula. I really like the look of Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. That Hammer Dracula costume is great. The first horror of Dracula actually didn't put any red lining in the middle, inside of it, which is fine. But I like the red lining. You gotta be careful doing remakes. Like I said, if you can make a monster movie and make it your own unique monster, do that. Seriously, do that. I mean, let's see something new. Even the Wolfman, the new Wolfman, I liked it better than most, but when he was CGI'd and running like the Groovy Ghoulies, dancing across the rooftops and jumping, I thought, yeah, I get it, but I don't really need it. There's even a point at the beginning of the film where Rick Baker gets hit by him. He gets hit by him so fast you don't even see what happens. He's just gone. I'm like, let's see it. It's not real. It doesn't seem real to me that something would hit someone that fast. I get it in comic books. That's fine. They're comic books. But these are gothic tales. These are classic tales of monsters. It's okay if he hits him and we see a little bit of him. It's like they don't trust the story enough. So they have to beef up the effects. Like even that prequel to the remake of The Thing, there's a scene where at the beginning where they fall into a glacier and it's just so overdone. It's so like, come on. And that film, of course, was made with all practical effects. And then the executives came in and said, no, let's just do CGI. So they went back and they redid all the effects in CGI and they got rid of the practical effects. which is one of the reasons the remake of The Thing works so well. It's the reason that all of these films work well. American Werewolf was practical effects, right? The Fly was practical effects. The remake of The Blob was practical effects. In the 80s, we were still doing practicals, right? But now we're in an era of CGI, which again, like I said, works for Godzilla and King Kong. Not for The Wolfman or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So, we'll see you soon. Take care and control your temper.